Director of Life Sciences for Triangle, and I'll be your facilitator. A couple of housekeeping rules, and they're not rules, they're just to help you. We want a very collaborative session here, so please feel free to jot down some questions. We will have a Q&A, and we'll answer those questions during the Q&A. This is not a teacher in front of the class, and the students stay quiet. So hopefully you'll get some good information from today's sessions. Let me talk to you a little bit about the speakers. If I can have that next slide. We have not one, but we have two great speakers to participate in today's webinar. We have Raj Srinivas, who is our CTO in BlockEdge. He has 25 years of experience in architecting and leading implementation of innovation solutions, and it goes back to many, many years. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and I'm embarrassing him by saying that. But his areas of expertise obviously are in cloud security, blockchain, and I affectionately call him the father of our blockchain services. So Raj will be speaking today. And we also have another fantastic speaker, and I'm going to embarrass him too. His name is Marshall Bricking, and he worked for AWS, has 25 years in life sciences. He's currently the AWS manager in building the life sciences vertical. One of the things that I absolutely love about Marshall is that he does not complicate the uncomplicated. So he's very straightforward, and better than that, he doesn't. He uncomplicates the complicated, is what I wanted to say, but he's with us, and I truly appreciate it. Let me go over the agenda for all of you. Do it real quickly. Marshall will begin with the blockchain initiatives currently underway in pharma and life sciences vertical. Then Raj would jump in and talk about the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and the track and trace behind it. He'll continue with the challenges in building and managing a global blockchain network, and then of course the acceleration of blockchain and the adoption in pharma and life sciences, this clever cryptocurrency technology that has jumped over to the life sciences and pharma industry. So with that, Marshall can take over and let it ride. Thank you, Marshall.
Hey, thanks, Vince, appreciate it. So, as Vince said, I'm the global lead for the life sciences vertical for AWS Marketplace. And what I'd like to start off with is just setting the stage of why does this matter? And the reason that we're looking at blockchain, the reason that we're looking at the Drug Supply Chain Security Act is because we're trying to combat pharmaceutical counterfeiting. And it's a big problem. There was a really good study done 2 years ago by the OECD where looking at 3 years of time, pharmaceuticals were the 10th most counterfeited type of product internationally, and 96% of websites selling pharmaceuticals were doing so illegally. So it's estimated that in 2016, the total value of illegal pharmaceuticals was 4.4 billion internationally traded. It doesn't include what was produced and consumed domestically. So it's a big deal, and when you look at this, it affects a lot of people, and this has a pretty huge effect. If I can get the next slide, please. So obviously, counterfeiting harms patients. They're going to suffer the adverse outcomes, either from not receiving the therapeutic or receiving an adverse therapeutic. Providers also suffer because this erodes their trust. Patients aren't coming back. They're not being treated. They don't know that they're consuming counterfeits. And it's also going to increase the cost of care when those adverse outcomes come around. Manufacturers lose income, obviously, but they also lose trust. Again, because patients don't know that these are counterfeit products, and so they'll blame the manufacturer for any adverse events or for lack of therapy. And governments ultimately bear great cost. The most simple is loss of taxes, but really the governments are bearing the cost of this sicker patient base as a result of this. So a lot of parties are harmed, and that's what we're here to combat, and that's really why the DSCSA came out. But when looking at how do we develop something that can really show a secure supply chain? And first, you look at all the players. So there's different players, suppliers, manufacturers, repackager, wholesaler, the hospital pharmacy itself, and the patient. And then in between, you have third-party logistics for moving products from point to point. So a lot of different people, a lot of different entities, and they all have to be using a system and communicating well. Doesn't happen today. So what you see is some of these links in the chain have paper processes. Others who are doing this electronically might use data systems that don't have a smooth handoff. Or can you really trust the source of the data? Is there auditability? How mutable is that ledger? Because there's no transparency. And so given that, it's even systems that are designed today that only cover one part of the supply chain, it's tough to verify. There's no single source of truth. So with that, we look at what does blockchain solve? And it really addresses these issues quite neatly. So now with blockchain, you have an immutable record. So production updates are documented in one ledger that everybody can see because it's dispersed. Everything's time-stamped, everything is up to date, and when it's paired with IoT technology, everything from an unscheduled door opening to a change in temperature, this is all controlled and documented within this ledger, which gives everybody complete data visibility. There's one source of truth, and this is what you need in a regulatory environment. You have an audit trail. And so with all of this, we now have a more integrated solution. It looks something like this. A QR code is generated, a unique QR code for a pallet or for a batch. And then that is scanned at different points by different individuals. And this can be scanned by handheld devices. It can be with IoT, where you'll have sensors. It can be with cameras and computer vision. This is then tracked through logistics, through the manufacturer, and through the wholesaler. And if there's any problems, again, IoT devices can report real-time what's happening, and this gets reported to multiple sources. It's blockchain, it can't be changed, and it goes right to the pharmacy. So at all these points, you can even have the consumer verify it with a QR code, and that's being done by some customers now. Nestle is an example I'll show in a bit. But you have something now that all parties can trust, that all parties are using. And next slide, please. There are two organizations that are trying to bring together different parties for blockchain. Traditionally, you'll have one manufacturer who will put together a solution and then solicit buy-in from different parts of the chain, from the suppliers, from logistics, from wholesalers. But that becomes tough to manage if you're a wholesaler or if you're a pharmacy. Seeing multiple parties try to adopt one manufacturer's solution and then adopt another, then adopt another. There's a lot of juggling. So two organizations have come up and tried to get a consortium on a set platform. One is PharmaLedger, and they're in the EU. It's an EU initiative of 12 pharma companies and then 17 other entities, everything from academic to regulatory. And they bound together for a 3-year trial. And their goal is not just a trusted supply chain platform, but they're also looking at a way to extend this to clinical trials and to EMR, so combining health records. So with that, that's PharmaLedger's solution. So they're one group. And then the other group is here in the US. And this is led by a company in San Francisco called Chronicled. And they've gotten together, again, a large group of participants. They're looking more at the wholesaler and the GPOs. And with this group, this is MetaLedger in the US, they found that their blockchain solution meets all of the DSCSA requirements. So all of these parties went through, they're testing it, and they reach a favorable conclusion. And so this metallurgical group also doesn't just focus on the supply chain itself, they're also focusing on contracts and chargebacks for, again, wholesalers and GPOs. So two groups doing quite innovative things of having a single solution. And what you look at it from a customer point of view is an example of what Nestle has done. They've used this technology for 15 key commodities that go into their products, and they're now sending that to customers and saying, if you want to check the authenticity of the ingredients, this is a way to do so. So they're using it to build trust. And with that, I want to say that's the framework of why DSCSA exists. That's what we're trying to tackle, and blockchain, and again, paired with Internet of Things, fits really well to do so. I'll pause a moment for the survey, and then I will hand it off to Raj. Unless there are any questions you want to toss out there.
Marshall, thank you. What we'll do is we will, if we're not getting the questions now, for everyone's questions, please send them to us. We will have a Q&A in a few minutes. So with that, I introduce you again to Raj Srinivas, who will talk to us about the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and other aspects with his blockchain services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vince and Marshall. Good morning, everyone. So let's dive deep into DSCSA and track and trace. Marshall outlined a lot of good features of DSCSA and the compliance requirements. Let's go a little bit back in time and see why we are in this space right now, right? What is DSCSA, right? Basically, there was a requirement, about a decade ago when DSCSA and FDA basically thought that, all products, all drugs in the USA should be having some form of interoperable electronic tracking, right? So basically the idea was to identify and basically trace any prescription drug that is basically sold in the United States. That is the eventual idea. But so that was the start of the act, right, in 2013. And then we slowly progressed right now, and where we are right now is that an interoperable saleable returns requirement. This is an interesting point where so action was primarily on the lot level so far. Now we have come to the individual aggregated serials level. So serialization has to happen at the individual drug level is one of the requirements, right? That's been mandated, and also this will enable to do the product tracking or tracing better instead of a lot tracing. So for example, let's say there's a huge container where it is that has a lot of pallets in it, a lot of cases, and then you have some products in there. So if you want to trace to the least, the last item in that case, individual serialization helps, right, instead of lot tracing. So that is where FDA mandated individual serialization versus lot. And then they also mandated that instead of the ASN, the Advanced Shipping Notice, we will go with the EPSIS, right? So basically, the Electronic Product Control Information System, right? Product Code Information System, where message which has a lot of details, including the identifiers or the product identifiers as part of it, which contains the national drug code, the expiry date, the serial number, and lot number. So we can scope into when you're tracking or tracing, you can scope to a particular product instead of a lot or a container, right? So that's a big plus in tracking and tracing. And one more advantage, one more requirement was how to have authorized trading partners to be tracked and traced, so that people who are dealing with a partner in this network know that they are dealing with an authentic partner, right? So this again is another requirement as part of the interoperability requirements that was given. So what this does is because of the serialization, there is a lot of advantages, right? one of the primary advantages is we can take this entire system of tracking and highly high fidelity system in identifying drugs, and which can also, Marshall talked about this, to avoid counterfeiting, and also have a lot of, features like expiry can be tracked, refills can be tracked. There's a lot of precision that can happen to the tracking process, right? So this really helps. The serialization process helps, and most importantly, it helps to take this to the blockchain river, right? So we'll go there with the next slide, where I'm going to talk about a lot about how this particular phenomenon fits into blockchain perfectly, right? Marshall talked about the source of truth, which I'm going to elaborate here. The primary, trust that can happen in this network is because of the source of truth, a single source of truth that can be shared and cannot be, it's an immutable record, that can be shared across the different parties, the manufacturers, the third-party logistic providers, and even the dispensaries of the pharmacists. So basically, there's a lot of data that can go around, but if it's a truthful data, everybody is basically happy about it, right? So that is a big building block of blockchain for this DSCSA track and trace environment. So the next thing is the trading partners themselves, right? So there is a protocol called decentralized ID, or DID, which perfectly fits. It's another way of looking at the W3 standard, which looks at entities as decentralized IDs. For example, partners can be decentralized IDs who cannot be sharing their IDs with others, and each ID has their own attributes. So basically, a governance body can run this in a blockchain, and the authorized trading partners can be vouched for by the blockchain, right? So this is a great another addition which will make it a perfect fit. Right? The third and fourth are basically an offshoot or byproduct of going to blockchain. One is how the saleable returns can be validated electronically. Is a great offshoot we can have out of this, because the validation process itself, now it's looking at a source of truth, and and also the validation itself is going to be accepted by all the parties, because everybody is having the same data, and everybody knows that whatever comes out of this is definitely unaltered, and it can be trusted upon, right? So that basically is going to help the saleable returns, and also extending to further different products, all prescription products, drug products. So basically what happens is this gives an arena to even trace back to the manufacturer, right? So in other words, if there is a dispute about a particular serial number of a drug, we can say, okay, this particular drug originated from this source, and these are the different characteristics of that. So in other words, it gives a perfect source of truth analysis of verification of a drug, right? So that's a real benefit out of this track and trace going into blockchain, I would say. Next slide, please. The challenges, right? Now we have talked about why blockchain, right? And what are the challenges we are going to be looking at? Blockchain in a supply chain. Definitely there'll be challenges. Primarily when we look at this phenomenon, right? So there are about 10 or 11 criteria. So basically, depending on, let's say that an organization wants to go become a partner in one of these, supply chain blockchain networks, or they want to start their own as part of the, a DSCSA compliance process. So where they'll be starting, right? Importantly, they have to first select an environment. For example, they need to have whether it's a cloud environment, or it's going to be a what kind of environment they're going to deploy this, right? And then other criteria, like for example, the blockchain itself, the platform, what they're going to select, and the deployment criteria. For example, if it is going to be cost and time validated, and the smart contract strategies, the IT integration. One of the important aspects I want to point out here is when you're making the choices here, the IT integration strategy is a key choice, because we are looking at invariably in the supply chain mechanisms already pre-existing systems, right? So in other words, when there's a pre-existing application that needs to integrate with blockchain, that there comes an IT integration strategy need. So IT has to play a big part here, So in basically managing this entire ecosystem and funneling into the blockchain, which can take the data out that's coming out of the IT applications and make it blockchain oriented, right? So that is an important. That's why we put it in the center. The other aspects also affected. We will come to that as to how to address them. But these are some of the important aspects of blockchain in scaling into the DSCSA compliance problems, right? So let's after looking at these are the initial choices that'll really dictate how a company can adopt to a blockchain world. Then there are going to be higher challenges, right? The next slide, please. The higher challenges are primarily looking at scaling, scalability, availability of the blockchain networks, and deployment methodologies, right? Let's say a company wants to be a partner in this, but they want to start, incremental. They don't want to go all out initially, right? Because they want to see how a certain thing works first, in the blockchain world, and then they go to the next world. So next step. So what happens is here, there's going to be a lot of deployment mini steps they have to take. For example, they have to, okay, if I not go 24/7 inside the network, will that be okay with my, whatever the objectives we have in the blockchain network? If I go only part-time, right? Because to save some resources, will that help in the compliance process, or will it help me to be a full-timer in the network? Even though it is possible, because in the blockchain world, what happens is the reconciliation happens immediately after you rejoin the network, right? So that these are some possibilities we can think of if somebody do not want to invest completely into this in one go. So there are certain considerations, cost-sensitive deployment models, what I was just talking about, the velocity, right? Onboarding velocity. So once you're in a network which is thriving, you would want to see partners joining at a very rapid pace, right? You don't want a partner to join manually, and it's taking a lot of time for them to get invited into the network, joining for whatever reason. It could be a technical reason, it could be a business reason, it could be a validation reason, it could be a compliance reason, or it could be a cloud reason. Any of those reasons should not prevent a partner to join in a network, real quick or not. So and then comes the availability and scalability. So this applies for all the partners in the network, all the nodes in the network. The nodes are primarily, basically they're going to interact with the smart contracts to achieve what the DSCSA is mandating, right? For example, the identification of the drugs itself, the tracking and tracing of the drugs itself. So that is a clean requirement, right? It's a big requirement because your network should be available and scalable all the times if you want to be a partner who is going to be active in the network. Network standards and policy enforcement. Once you have a network, obviously you'll have consortium-based policies, network-based policies that needs to be enforced. So those they become vital here. And then once you have a network, it's like maintaining a software of the network. For example, each peer, first of all, the blockchain platform had to upgrade different versions when the vendor releases it, the software vendor releases them, and this should be applied across all nodes. So decisions have to be made at what point of time we go into maintenance mode. So there's a lot of challenges, right? And the network security and compliance, this again is an important edge security issue, because you're going to have a lot of tools. Like, for example, you're going to have RFID scanners, you're going to have the QR code scanners to be part of the network. So how to make sure those are secure? I mean, the data coming from them are clean and secure, and and they're going to be adding value to the network. So these are some of the bigger challenges while scaling the network, is what we're going to we see as challenges, but we're going to see how to mitigate these challenges in the next slide onwards. So how to accelerate this, right? How to acceleration the adoption with all these challenges there? How we can make blockchain easily portable towards to all the parties involved. Primarily, if you look at these 11 challenges that we highlight, we can there are three key areas, patterns we can find, right? One is there are a lot of infrastructure related items which we can automate. For example, some of the cloud aspects, some of the blockchain aspects, and some of the security aspects of it can be automated. So infrastructure and network automation is one key aspect, which can definitely kickstart the acceleration adoption of the blockchain. And second is the IT integration model. Like I said, before, the data is going to come from existing systems. So existing systems have to be integrated securely into the blockchain world, right? So that is the key. That's the second key. The third key is how to do this iteratively, right? You cannot build a blockchain network or a complete or even for one node for that matter overnight, right? Because you have to basically do an iterative adoption for the entire network. So we will look into all these three aspects, how they can be done in the next few slides. So on the infrastructure adoption, right, automation, right? So we define three clearly, four areas, right? Starting from multi-cloud foundation, because that's going to be the foundation where the blockchain is going to exist. Either the node and the network, they're going to exist in the cloud. So it could be any cloud. It could be AWS, Azure, or GCP, or IBM, any of these clouds. And then comes the blockchain networks themselves, right? How the networks can be fitted in there. It could be, any number of blockchains solutions out there. Could be Hyperledger, Ethereum, Corda, Quorum, any of them, right? And then IT systems integration. This comes the next as a next big hurdle, because what happens here is once you have these two layers defined, your existing IT have to be coupled into the blockchain networks for them to start transacting, communicating with the blockchain distributed ledger and getting the transactions, smart contract and getting the distributed ledger filled with transactions, right? And then comes the business solutions where you have a lot of data analytics layer built in if you want, right? With that, and importantly, security and compliance is going to be key, where we are going to look at in all these four steps, how we can be bootstrapping security compliance at every step, right? Organically is going to be the key. With that, we go to the next slide where we talk more about these, primarily the cloud and the blockchain processes here, right? The cloud management comes with a lot of requirements. For example, it has to be, in a particular cloud in a secure way. It has to have multi-cloud IPFS based, solutions in there built in. It has to have a domain controller. It has to have a DNS automatically defined, provisioned into the process. So if we have to go an automatic way here, so there are a lot of considerations. Of course, the DR, the CI/CD pipelines have to be considered. So there are a lot of considerations in the cloud management level, right? And once that is solved, we come to the blockchain out level where, like I said, it could be any blockchain platform, depending on which the consortium is going to adopt. It could be one of those that I just talked about. And then the containerization, right? So once we decide which software is going to get deployed, the containerization of the same software in the nodes. And then basically you have to look at persistent storage. You have to look at if it's going to be an advanced deployment, how to have Kubernetes built in with the manifest files, management of the manifest files, and the blockchain, the API platform API, all have to be built into that layer. And then comes the network management layer, where basically we talk about the membership. Like for example, you have to attract more members into the network, how they can join automatically into the network, how software upgrades can be done, consortium rules can be applied, and the smart contract can be generated if needed automatically, or at least provisions have to be made for coding them correctly. Basically alerting and monitoring, right? So all this have to be done in a secure, with the certificate controlled, with the identity and access management built in with the blockchain node and security. With that, we go to the next slide where we can talk about, the IT integration. Here, we have just given some tools here, API integration models, messaging, event management, payload transformation, transaction elastic search. So these are some of the framework models that can be built in for the IT integration to work. We can go a lot deeper into this. There are questions in there. The payload transformation is a key area where we have to, let's say there's an EPSIS event coming in, how to basically transform it into a payload that is needed for the DSCSA protocol. For example, if you have to have the right, serial numbers, the product identifiers built into the blockchain payload, how to transform that is a key thing. Messaging can be synchronous or asynchronous coming out of the EPSIS or any other event. If an organization is not ready with EPSIS, it could be any other messaging layer. API integration model with security built in will definitely help, with like OAuth or SAML built into it will help. Elasticsearch obviously helps to keep track of for an auditing purposes as to what the payload are going into the blockchain, right? With that, we go to the next slide. where the iterative adoption, right? So this is key, right? How do we do all this in one shot, right? It cannot be done in one shot, even if we have everything ready, right? Even if there's an automatic software, that blockchain as a service solution that is available to do all this, still you need the partners to adopt to it. So you have to start simple and very small with a small footprint, right? We start building the network with a few partners, few peers, and then slowly expand, have the dApp built with only few events from ERP, from the FSys systems. And once some of these events are starting to work correctly, with the the blockchain getting populated correctly with the right blocks, these are at the QA level, right? Not even at the production level. Once when you add more partners, more nodes, and more troubleshooting, automatically itself, it's not even manual, right? We are talking about automatic solutions which can help here, which can, and once the more events are mapped, and over a period of time, we can grow the network and application over time. So it will be a iterative adoption process for the entire consortium, right? So this is the this certainly works in the real world in other consortiums in other areas. So I think this is going to be the key, how this can be planned out and made to work, right? With that, we go to the next slide, where this is a typical how installation of how it will work after all this is completed, right? This is an after state, where there's a blockchain network running, connecting different partners like the manufacturers, the third-party logistics providers, it could be even the CMOs. So what happened is they have a blockchain node fixed onto the network, and it could be, the node can be on AWS, or it could be on Azure, it could be GCP. So the blockchain solution, the blockchain as a service solution, should be able to handle this, right? And once this is done, and there is an integration layer, you see the small double arrow on top, which will actually integrate with the actual IT application of the organization. So with that, I think this is how it will look. I mean, it looks very simple, but there's a lot of work that goes into it to make it work perfectly. But these three layers that we just talked about, if they are there in place, it'll work. I think it'll work wonders for the blockchain network. With that, with that, we go to the Q&A process. Yeah.
Raj, thank you very much. Truly appreciate it. And Marshall, I appreciate your time as well. Folks, as we wait for your questions, I do want to point out the control panel. You will see that there's a handout section. You can click on that link and you'll get a brochure of today's webinar, the topics that we discussed. But we also have an email after the webinar where you can request the brochure. And that email is, if you can jot it down, info@healthcaretriangle.com. Once again, that's info@healthcaretriangle.com. And the last thing I'll say as we wait for questions is that there will be a link to the recording. It will be shared via email tomorrow, and it will also be on our website. So with that, I do have a question. This question is for you, Raj. How can an organization in pharma and life sciences prepare and plan to join the Drug Supply Chain Security Act networks or efforts?
Thank you, Vince. It's a great question. Like I said, there are several aspects to this, right? There is a business aspect, definitely, and then there is a compliance aspect, and then the technology aspect, right? So first, we have to prepare a questionnaire inside the organization to address all these three aspects, as to see, where we are in these three layers, right? Once we have that defined as an organization, where we are, what is an objective that we have to accomplish, with this, foray into the blockchain, and especially for the DSCSA process. And then once that is defined and objectives are clearly defined, then we go into the compliance aspect, right? What kind of data we are willing to put out there correctly, so that it will not only help the compliance process, it will also help us to do a lot of work with that data, especially on the drug tracking and tracing, and back to the manufacturer, right? For all the prescription drugs. The third part is obviously the technology part, which I think is slowly, like I said, if we follow those 3 tenets that we talked about in the slides presentation, where it'll really be helpful if we can try to automate some of this, or find a provider who can automate most of these processes, selection of the blockchain, selection of cloud, and the toughest part, believe me, is the middle part, right? The standard integration, IT integration model, where because every company, every enterprise has a unique system of applications that they have to integrate with, to an external world like blockchain, right? So obviously everybody has a unique requirement there. So I think there comes the challenge, is to pick and choose the right tools in order to interact with the outside world, the blockchain world, right? And then selectively don't do an adoption overnight, do it iteratively, and then achieve a steady state and then go from there, right? I think that'd be the right right way to do this. Yes.
Okay, great. Marsha, we have a question for you. How does AWS help customers comply with the Drug Supply Chain Security Act?
Well, we make, as Raj mentioned, we actually make the tools. So we make the building blocks to create these solutions. One example is Amazon Blockchain, which can be an engine for this. Another is AWS IoT services for the monitoring of product in transit or in manufacturing. But these are the tools to build solutions. Most customers are looking to buy solutions, so I think we apply to the builders, but our tools are most often used by vendors, and Raj can speak to this, where they'll use our tools, create something more, and then have it customized more out of the box and deliver those to customers.
Okay. Thanks, Marshall. Hey, Raj, your turn again. This one's for you. Technical-wise, what are the critical steps to shift from traditional systems, internal applications, to blockchain?
Absolutely. Great question again. So the internal applications, right? Like I said, we are not going to build anything new for blockchain. It is going to be coming from the internal applications, right? So how do we do this, right? How do we do? Let's even take the DSCSA example, right? Where you have an internal set of ERP systems and that produce data and events right now, right? But how do we take that to blockchain, right? So you will have to have a layer built in, which will basically filter out the data that is coming out, so that it could be it is blockchain enabled, right? So first of all, we don't want to put all data out there, right? Because the mandate is only for tracking and tracing of drugs, right? Drug data. So any PII, PHI should be filtered out, and obviously the EPSIS messages should contain only those relevant ones, that has to go to the next step, right? For example, if you're going to talk about aggregation, let's say a drug is made up of a different set of boxes. For example, there's a lot of, like I talked about the case palette scenario, where there's a lot of aggregation happening for a particular lot to be identified, and from the lot you can have a parent-child relationship to come to the child. So those kind of scenarios, where you these events are coming through your ERP systems, and then you have to have a transformer or a payload transformer to take that and transform it into a message that is needed for blockchain, right? So the payload transformation plays a critical part, because it's not an organization can be part of multiple blockchains also. So your payload transformer should be able to take your messages and then transform it to the type of the blockchain payload that is required for that particular blockchain, right? Type. So there is a challenge out there, and the messaging layer have to be really strong here, because once you have the messages filled in, your inbox will be filled with that, and so you should have you should not be having a availability problem. You should be solving this as and when they come. So the messages could be asynchronous or synchronous. So there's a lot of thought has to go in doing that. And the API layer that is fronting this is key, because you don't want any external parties to be hitting this layer, right? You have to have a filtered approach where there's an OAuth security built in, so that only the authenticated calls an authenticated payload and the required calls are coming in either through an API call or it could be a webhook that is triggering the API. So all this is happening in a filtered way, an authentic way into the system. And finally, if there's any audit requirement, you can use the Elasticsearch to do that. You can have the Logstash and the Kibana built in. It could be vendor neutral implementation because these are all open source products. Or you can, like Marshall said, you can go to AWS to get them. So these are some of the important building blocks. There could be a lot of vendor products. I don't want to mention names here in each of these circles out there. So once you adopt the right one, depending on your requirement, the organization requirement, I think integration can be done smoothly. Yeah.
Raj, great answer. Thank you. Stay with me, buddy. You got another one. How do we tackle advanced challenges like scalability, availability, and time to market?
Absolutely. Yeah, great. The advanced techniques, right? Let's say once you have a steady state blockchain running, right? For let's say even for the DSCSA case, let's say the network has about 15 partners of different types. Some of them manufacturers, some of them third parties, logistic providers, some of them CMOs, some of them even dispensers or pharmacies. So what will happen is, once we have all these different entities out there, it is hard to manage them, right? It is hard to maintain the network sanity, right? You need to have each one can be in a different network. Like for example, one of them could be in AWS, one of them could be on-prem, one of them could be in a private cloud. So each of them will have their own issues because that's what their organization has chosen, right? Nobody can mandate everybody should go to one particular cloud provider because that's what the organization has chosen for various other reasons. So with this, dichotomy in view, how scalability problems addressed, right? So that is where a good blockchain consulting service and also a solution engineering team would help here, like how to maintain the scalability problem addressed, right? For example, if it's a cloud, how to do auto scaling, how to make sure that we improve the disaster recovery processes. For example, by hosting in different regions and having peers coming in and out if there is a need. For example, it can be refurbished as and when there's required, or it can scale immediately and independently of the other peers of the same organization. So there's a lot of techniques that can be followed here. Like I said, these are advanced issues. If an organization has come thus far, then they have really crossed a lot of layers to come there. So I think if we do some of these, management techniques, I think it can be solved. These problems can be really solved. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's because Marshall's next. So thank you very much. Marshall, can you give some specific examples of how this prevents counterfeiting?
Yeah, there's several ways. Really, it's all the verification of the code. So it's an example of a QR code generated and somebody tries to copy that QR code so it looks the same to the consumer. When it's scanned, it's flagged as not authentic. Or if somebody copies the exact code, then if two drugs show up in two different places, they're flagged as well. And then if this also works not just for counterfeiting, but for recalls. So if there's an issue, then we can really quickly identify where those drugs are that need to be recalled. So there's a lot of ways when something's not right, it gets flagged very quickly. Even if you were to have a legitimate bottle or vial and then you refill it after it's purchased, you refill it with something else that's already marked as sold, so that can't be sold again. So there's a lot. It's very traceable, and those are just some examples where that prevents counterfeiting and also helps with recalls.
All right, thank you, Marshall. Hey, we're at 11:45, so spot on, perfect timing. There are no more questions, but I would like to thank everyone once again. Raj, Marshall, excellent presentations. Truly appreciate your time. And a simple reminder that the attendees will receive an email with the link to the recording. Also, you still have a few seconds while I'm still on to download the brochure here live on the webinar. Or if you decide to do that later or share it later with others, please remember it is the email info at healthcaretriangle.com. Once again, info at healthcaretriangle.com. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hey, thanks all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.